Dear friends, today I will be talking to a friend who I've been in touch with for quite a while, but then only through an interview that I did with another friend, with Paul Craig Roberts, who mentioned Peter Koenig's name. I realized I have to interview him. It's about time to do it. So here we are today. We have Peter Koenig with us. He's an economist, a very experienced economist, international economist. But I'll leave the rest to you, Peter, because as we all know, whatever is written on Wikipedia probably doesn't quite reflect the truth.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rainer, to have me on your show, and it's a big pleasure to talk with you. Well, what else can I say about myself? I've worked for about 30 years with the World Bank, literally uh, throughout the world, in about 80 countries to some extent, and also in a cooperative program for a while with WHO. So I know a little bit the inside of WHO also. And well, I've been following the COVID hoax for a long time, and I think we had already an interview together at the very beginning when you started on COVID, maybe in 2020 could be. But anyway, right now there's a different time, and there are different subjects that are burning. One of them, one of them is the BRICS, particularly the expanded BRICS. They just had their meeting at the end of August in Johannesburg, and uh, and added 6 new countries to these BRICS. Many of them, or two of them from Africa. It's actually there are Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, then Iran, who was a contender for a long time, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These are the 6 new countries. Together, they are 11. And I must say, at the very beginning, I had hopes and big expectations because I also thought that these new BRICS, together particularly with the two leaders, which is the two inventors of the BRICS, China and Russia, are still the leaders. And China has, of course, the Belt and Road, which they had already said mostly, at least semi-officially, will be concentrating now more on the BRICS. So in order to give them a boost and to bring their economy together. Actually, this was pretty much confirmed. I was in July. I was for about 2 weeks in Beijing and had some meetings which confirmed that. Now, I still hope that this will take place. But then when you really look at these BRICS countries and the leaders of these countries, then you start wondering what is actually going on, because not only are they very diverse in geography, of course they're all over the place, also in culture, all over the place, and particularly in ideology. And so how can you bring these 11 countries under one roof? And I know I've read one report which really sounded very much of what I was thinking, that the structure that was left in Joburg was very loose. How to combine them and how to coordinate them, it was left very loose, probably because they're so diverse. Now, they were talking about different things that started raising more question in my mind. They were starting about the common currency. They started about the common currency backed by gold. And first of all, I think gold backing is not a solution for any currency really. What we need is backing of commodities that are used by most of the countries. I think this was also an idea of Russia's top economist. What's his name? Is now an advisor to President Putin. Anyway, I think what really counts in a new economic system is having maybe 15 to 20 or even more typical uh, commodities that are used all over the place, or particularly in the countries that used to but they use it for backing their currency, and instead of gold, and value them according to the quantities they have. And a similar system, I think, is in place by ALBA, by the countries of ALBA. This is one way of doing it. And another way, which I actually also discussed when I was in China, is to apply the principle, not of course not the currency, but the principle of what the IMF did with the SDR, the special drawing rights, using the currencies of all 11 members, weighing them according to some criteria of their economies, and then create a virtual currency which is being used as a trading currency among themselves first, and later on with any country that would like to join. I mean, it should be open to everybody who would like to join. This is one way of getting away from the dollarization, and they have, even the original BRICS were created under the with basically the ideology we want to get out of the dollar. And already then I look, and they had, and they still do have a BRICS bank. It's called.
Wasn't the term BRICS invented by a former J.P. Morgan banker?
I don't know that. I wouldn't. Could be that, but I don't know. I couldn't affirm that. I mean, the BRICS are the abbreviations, and they just put them together so that they sound like a brick. I think it's not a bad word. But when I looked at this BRICS bank, which was created at the same time, I think 2009, the BRICS were created. Then, and they said already then, we want to de-dollarize our economies. And then I looked at the composition of the capitalization of these BRICS banks, and guess what? Well, it was all denominated in US dollars. And then digging further, I found out that the US, actually the Federal Reserve, has warned them, either you capitalize your bank in US dollars, or we will just simply demolish it. And that's the way it went there. And so it's still, as far as I know, dollarized. But let's this BRICS bank aside for now, because they haven't done anything, and I'm not sure when they are ready to do something. What is more important, I think, is the BRICS as a trading union among themselves and expanding throughout the world. And for that, they have the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which will be concentrating more on them. But then, still, I mean, the big slogan before and in Johannesburg, and even after Johannesburg, was de-dollarization is the prime goal of the 11 BRICS. That China and Russia have been doing that for a long time is clear. We have seen that. But that the BRICS are going to do that, I thought, it was a little bit my illusion that maybe that will change something. But then, of course, you look at the individual leaders of these BRICS countries, and I see that, for example, Lula. Lula, he is a very typical case. During his first 2 terms, from 2003 to 2011, I believe, his central bank was managed by a Wall Street banker, by Enrique Mereyes, who was from Fleet Bank, I think, which was Boston Bank originally, and then bought up by Fleet. He was one of the 5 big Wall Street banks. He's an American citizen. He was the chief of the central bank of Brazil during Lula's first term, to the point where Wall Street praised Lula as the good boy, and the IMF. And I was still with the bank at the time when I heard them saying he is a good scholar, meaning that he has learned very well his lessons on how to run the economy. And this was before the young global leaders, the scholars of Klaus Schwab became known, and checking up on these scholars, he is also one of them, Lula. So, how much does that say for the country itself, and how it will de-dollarize if the whole Brazil is full with the IMF and World Bank and Wall Street debt? This is one. And then you have Argentina, and Argentina's top contender for the elections, I think on the 22nd of October, is a certain Mr. Milei. He is an extreme rightist, as you probably know. He has won as a big surprise, and I don't know how honest this was, but anyway, he has made 30% of the primaries and is the top contender for the presidency. He has declared immediately afterwards, or probably already before, but afterwards it became known to the world that if he becomes president, he would scrap the Central Bank of Argentina and would adopt the US dollar as the currency for Argentina. This, of course, is a shock, and especially in Argentina, where I worked very intensely during the crisis years in 2001, 2002, when eventually they broke loose from the peso dollar parity, which was basically a total dollarization. And eventually, during the Kirchner years, they were salvaged, and also with a lot of favorable loans from Venezuela. Argentina got out of the mess. Then they put in Macri, which brought Argentina back to its knees. And now Milei, if he's really elected, I hope not, then that may happen, and this would be a total disaster. So these are just two examples which made me wonder how serious is this de-dollarization. Then the next step is, we all know that the Bank of International Settlement, sitting in Basel, where else, the paradise of white-collar crime, is also called the central bank of all central banks, and controls, in terms of monetary flow, about 90 or more percent, I believe more than 90% of all the monetary flows, including of China and Russia. Russia has for now been suspended because of what they call sanctions, but China has not too long ago joined, and I wonder why. Now, if all the BRICS countries are members of the BIS, the Bank for International Settlement, which is privately owned, it's owned by the Rothschild clan, and is of course totally dollarized. What does that mean for the BRICS? They are all members of it. Now, and that confronting all these facts with the top slogan of de-dollarization is something which makes me wonder. Then in addition to that, they had a long, 94-point declaration of the end of the conference, 22 to 24 of August in Joburg. And they came up with some of the most horrible things that we all know. The conclusions were like, I have them written down here, that they would adhere to the WEF's and the UN agenda, to the WEF's Great Reset and the UN Agenda 2030, which are the 17 development goals, and you know exactly what they entail. They also said we urgently stress to follow the policies of climate change. Then they said, they want to adhere to the climate change, UN climate change framework. They also affirmed the World Trade Center, that they will continue with the World Trade Center principles. That's totally against de-dollarization, as we know, if they follow that. And of course, they follow very, very closely the WHO instructions on on health, and so on. I mean, there all of these points that we are fighting against are practically in their resume and basically in their conclusions of the meeting. Now, having said this, and it's very sad to leave it at that, and I'm always trying to find a positive note. And for that, I'm again in contact with China. It's very difficult, of course, to do that in writing because they know exactly how the correspondence is checked. So I don't know whether I get really a serious answer. But the thing is that if you look at it like that, and I have studied also a little bit Taoism, which is still the basic philosophy of the of Chinese politics. It's disappeared a little bit, but it's still the underlying mode of Chinese politics, and this is 10,000 years old. So one of the principles of this Taoist policies is if you want to fight the enemy, don't fight him openly. Get underneath the enemy. In other words, I would interpret that coming from China would be it's better to be part of the BIS, to fight from inside, and since they are the leader of the BRICS together with Russia, they may have had a big influence on how these conclusions were set up. Right? That's my second thoughts on it, my positive thoughts. The same with following all these principles. They put that down on paper, but then if I look back on how many of these final reports of meetings have actually been followed up on, they're issued and then forgotten, many of them. And why couldn't that be the case here too? In order to not confront the beast, they could have simply said what the beast wants to hear, and what the world wants to see. What the BRICS are really not that bad. They are really part of the beast, the Bank for International Settlement, and so let us put our attention a little bit somewhere else. That could be the positive side on it. I'm not sure, but this is my second thought. After I wrote the article, I thought, it can't be with these two countries that all of it is just hot air. So that's where I'm at this point, and I really hope that I'll get somehow to talk with the Chinese, with those people whom I trust, and who will perhaps give me some more concrete answers. But I'm not sure whether this is possible via mail or even via telephone. I doubt it. I'll try, but I doubt it. So it would have to be with the visit.
For the general public, or for much of the general public, the BRICS looked like the perfect way out of this mess. But only at first glance. If you take a closer look, of course, you see what you just described. They're in line with pretty much everything that the World Economic Forum stands for. But if you take a second glance, and that's what I find very interesting, then this may be deception. I mean, we know that the other side is not a monolithic bloc. We know that they're fighting each other. We know that they have no problems even sacrificing their own children if that's necessary. But in this case, as I don't know what to make of the Chinese, I know that George Soros thinks that he owns China more or less, but he thinks a lot of things when he thinks, if he thinks. But I do think that maybe, as far as the Russians are concerned, the Russian leadership is concerned, that may be true. Your assessment may be true, that they're in it, but only so as to be able to fight the system from within without really pretending to be part of it, but without really being part of it. He may actually care for his own people. I don't know for sure, of course. There's a lot of speculation, but he may actually care about his own people. But nobody knows for sure. On first glance, a lot of people think this is our hope. They're the ones who are going to pull us out of this. But what if they're playing good cop, bad cop? That's another way of looking at it.
Yeah. To what you just said about Russia, yesterday they talked, of course, and they will continue talking about the pandemic treaty of WHO and the what is it? I think 82 points or 94. I forgot the exact number, but a hell of a lot of points of changes that they want to make to the international health regulations, and one of them, the key one of them, is the pandemic treaty. So yesterday, the president of the UN General Assembly issued the brief statement that it was voted on and that the majority agreed with it. Something very brief. He didn't say how many countries voted. He didn't say to what exactly was agreed on. All these things were left open. So the statement was coming out from my perspective, from what I've seen so far, is to just spread fear again, to make people afraid. What is going on? Now,
Yeah.
this is going to go on for the rest of these discussions are going to go on for the rest of the General Assembly behind closed doors, mind you. Now, adding to this, there was something very important, because what stuck out and what was in this statement, that some countries objected, I think 11 altogether. They didn't mention them, but they mentioned Russia. Russia was one of the countries that objected. And so that would vouch for what you just said about Russia being really seriously defending in defense of their country and of their people. So this is a hope. And from all the things that I have seen actually and talked with when I was in China, I believe China is too. I still don't know why China followed so closely this COVID protocol. That is still a mystery, and I couldn't get an answer. I don't know. There must have been a political reason. I don't know. I have some suspicions, but I believe that they are together with Russia, actually on our side, actually on the side of defending humanity. So
Yeah.
there's still some hope, and I believe I will put more of my expectations in the hope than in what I introduced the meeting with, which was the negative part of the BRICS.
Mhm.
I hope all these people like Lula will eventually, be disabled in a way by those who set up this virtual currency. And with virtual currency, and in the meantime, this virtual currency cannot be set up from one day to another. I remember how long it took to set up the SDR
Mhm.
because it's a political fight. In theory, economically, it's easy. But then it's a political fight, and the political fight with the SDR is because the US wanted to have the supremacy, even though their economy is by far no longer the strongest. And they still have the upper hand in the SDR. So I could imagine something similar may happen if they want to do a similar kind of currency, virtual currency for trading among themselves and eventually outside of the BRICS. But an interim solution, which is already actually happening very much in the ASEAN countries. The RCEP, largest free trade agreement that China brokered, I think, during about 10 years with 10 countries, including even Japan, South Korea, I believe, New Zealand and Australia are part of this deal. And this is supposed to become the largest free trade agreement in the world within the next 5 years, overshadowing everything else. Now, these countries, one of their principles, one of their, if you want to call it, constitutional points is dealing in local currencies. What does that mean? That means that they set up with each other swap accounts. That means each country has an account with the respective central banks of the other partner countries. And that can be done. I think that has even happened between China and France at one point. Whether it still exists, I don't know. But at one point, they had a swap account so that they could avoid the SWIFT system. And SWIFT is, of course, also private, strangely private, set up in Belgium, but totally dollarized. And of course, through SWIFT, countries are sanctioned. To get out of SWIFT, you deal with local currencies and with these swap accounts, and it's easily. I mean, between China and Russia, this has been going on for the last almost 10 years. I remember when they have set up the first swap account deal, and it works very well. It's actually the easiest solution, and particularly it's an interim solution, and it has nothing to do with politics, like as a BRICS SDR type currency would have to do. So I think this is the interim solution, and that could start immediately.
Mhm.
And it has actually already started in many of the BRICS countries, especially the new ones. I think Argentina has been dealing and trading with, especially with China, but also with Saudi Arabia in their local currency. And Saudi Arabia is one of the first countries, the OPEC country that was told in the early 70s by the Bush family, you must trade hydrocarbons only in US dollars. Saudi Arabia, the head of the OPEC, went to China and said, I'm dealing with you only in local currencies, either in yuan or in our Riyadh currency. So, it starts. It has happened already. And the other thing that is also encouraging is a very unwritten law has been for a long time, for the last almost more than 50 years, since the Second World War, is that the trading currency, international trading currency, was also the US dollar. So international contracts, irrespective of what country with what other country, were set up in US dollars, no longer. I mean, this has diminished enormously. I think when it was at one point 100%, it's now down to close to 60%, which is still too much, but it's an enormous decrease. And if you look at talking about de-dollarization, if you look at the reserves in the early 90s, almost 100% of the reserves of the countries around the world were in US dollars or US dollar denominated securities. Now it's below, I've read figures that's below 50%, but others are around 50%. This is enormous because, of course, the US dollar, if you look at the flow of all these currencies that at one point we called convertible currencies, meaning the currencies that have some international value, trading value, of all these currencies, about 60% are in US dollars. So you can imagine, and now comes the point to which I would like to follow afterwards before we talk about West Africa, of which, of course, 60% of this currency, you can do everything you want with any country, and especially if you have BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, BlackRock and Vanguard management and staff, and even their shares, their shareholdings are interchangeable. So if they want to present themselves as one company, one financial corporations, they manage probably about $30 trillion. $30 trillion. You imagine if you need 10% to leverage a country, they do that very easily. So every country can be leveraged, and that brings me to the point where I believe these financial organizations, this corporate financial world, is behind it all.
Of course.
These are the ones who are behind it all. And how do they do it? They use what I've identified so far, 3 executing agencies. One is the WEF. I know for a fact that the World Economic Forum is financed largely by BlackRock. You know, it's not the only one, but it's the largest donor of finance. They call it the financiers. They don't call them donors, partners. So BlackRock and WEF. The other executing agency is WHO. Absolutely. WHO was never supposed to be a UN agency because it was set up 4 years after the UN system by the Rockefeller Group, you know, by David Rockefeller at the time, who said, who was a eugenist, who said openly, if I control the health of the people, I control the people. And then that I know as an insider from WHO also. So this is very clear. WHO should never have been a UN agency. In fact, today WHO is financed. WHO's budget is financed to some years to more than 80% by the private sector, mostly by the pharmaceuticals. Bill Gates is a big donor, and others in interested sectors, and only 20% or less comes from actually the member countries contribution. So you can imagine this is a private organization that listen to the partners. You can't even call them shareholders, and they have full immunity. And of course, all these organizations are tax-free in Switzerland. So that's the second one, and the third one is Washington as an executing agency. And this has become, to me, very, very clear when they put in Biden, because he is not calling the shots on anything, and we all know that. There are other people or other organizations behind it, and so this is very, very clearly the case. That's why any other contender for next year's election, if they take place in the United States, will have a very, very hard time to compete, because they want to keep Biden as long as possible, because they can do whatever they want, and Biden will just carry it out. So Washington is the third executing agency. Behind it is also the big finance. Big finance, big pharma, the military complex, industrial complex, these three together.
And big tech also.
Big tech also. Yes, these four. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think even if we're right in hoping that the BRICS are on the other side, or at least to a degree on the other side, I think this is still only a transition, because if we want to get out of this monopolar system, the unipolar system can't be the end of the line. I think we have to move away from anything that is top-down government. We have to get back to the roots and have our own little communities that are self-sufficient, independent of any of these global corporations and global entities, and have their own tailor-made, custom-made education system, healthcare system, et cetera. Then they can connect with each other, exchange the best ideas. But ultimately, I think that's what we have to get back to in order to regain our sovereignty, our individual sovereignty. So even if this is going to be a transitional period that we're moving into by way of the BRICS, and even if we're right, hoping for the best, it is not the end of the line. Something else will come up afterwards. But for the time being, maybe this is good for us. I just hope that this is correct. Even though you really, nobody knows anything. It's all, we're guessing, we're speculating, and what we do know is that they all fight each other. So in that sense, maybe this is a good way out for the time being. Ultimately, we're going to have to look for our own sovereignty, regain our own personal sovereignties, irrespective of national sovereignties, which are also there or should be there. But unless we first regain our personal sovereignties, I don't think we're ever going to get there. But that's where we need to go, because anything that is top down is about power. anything that is top down will enable the other side through their captured agencies, through the WHO, the United Nations. We spoke to one of their former pretty high-ranking officer at the United Nations. His name is Carlin Georgescu, and he explicitly said they're a bunch of liars. This group is totally corrupt. It's all about money. When they talk about peace, they mean war. When they talk about the truth, they mean lies. So everything is inverted, not just with the United Nations, but also with the WHO. I don't even think that they ever started out as good organizations. They were always designed to bring about a one world government. That's true as far as I'm concerned, both for the United Nations, but also for the WHO.
I agree with you, Colin.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. Yes, and also what you said before about we have to set up our own systems. Absolutely. I've heard you say that before, and I think I even wrote you a note about it. This is exactly the way we have to go. Even while I was with the World Bank, I had very often written about a principle that I think will eventually do much more for what is called development than what is currently these huge investments which are called development. I think I would call it very simply local production for local consumption with local money and with local banking and with trading among like-minded, at the beginning, neighboring countries. And so we would merge countries together and become bigger and bigger, or countries or groups of people together, communities, so that they could become independent, as you said, sovereign countries anymore. I think it is absolutely impossible, and I thought that already when I was still working for these systems, to reform them is impossible.
Yeah.
They have been going too far. It's not possible to reform them. For example, you have to take the World Bank or even the IMF, and no media would talk about it. They are still in South America. They're still everywhere. They're still in Africa doing their projects, their investments. But who is much, much bigger already today are the Chinese banks with their Belt and Road. Even I think in Latin America, you have already 8 countries who are part of the Belt and Road. And Syria, which was Bashar Assad, is just visiting. Is right now he is in China, and his country is of course very strategically located. It's surrounded by many enemies and many potential friends now, and the Mediterranean. And this country is part of the Belt and Road, and I think this country may become a pole for China, or maybe also for Russia, because they have both been helping them defending themselves from the West. So with these as an interim solution, multipolar system, possibly, hopefully, with the positive way of looking at the BRICS on the one hand, and on the other hand, with a little bit longer view in mind of setting up new communities and new sovereign groups of people and societies. I think this is the long term solution. I totally agree with you on that. Totally.
Great. And why not make use of the good things that are coming along the way with the BRICS countries? And when we see we can't trust them anymore, we're still headed in the right direction, towards our own self-sufficient communities. That should be in my view, should be the overarching goal. But along the way, why not team up with some of the good guys that we meet along the way? Yeah, Dagmar.
I was asking Mr. Robertson at our interview about about this Basel Bank, the Bank of International Exchange, and he said that we have to ask you because
that's Paul Craig Roberts.
Sorry, yeah, Paul Craig Roberts, yeah, because he was discussing where the evil is located. And I was asking him whether the evil is located there, because I never had heard about this bank, only by a talk of this Dutch guy, Ronald Bernard, who said that he was working for the people of whom nobody knows the name, but who are on the top and do all these currency dealings. And so I'm asking you, can you tell us a bit more about this bank?
Sure. Yes, I think at least I try. You know, this bank was set up, if I'm correct, in 1931, and the Bank for International Settlement. It was apparently set up, that was the pretext to settle Germany's debt from the First World War, and later on from the Second World War. But in fact, Germany, as you know, has paid back basically nothing, or not very much. There was not much debt that they paid back to the winners. Most of it was forgiven. Why? Because Germany played a role in this war, a war they were selected for by the United States in the First World War and the Second World War, and both were to demolish the Soviet Union and basically Russia. And so they were really.
Let me quickly jump in, Peter.
Yeah.
We know that we've learned in the meantime that Hitler probably was not fully aware of his role. But what about his banker? What about Hjalmar Schacht?
Exactly. Now, and that's where the beast comes in. You know, Hitler's war was almost entirely, or at least his war against Russia, financed by the Federal Reserve, and that was the purpose of the Bank for International Settlement. At that time, they carried suitcases full of money, and the first manager of the Bank for International Settlement was a former chairman of the Federal Reserve. I forgot his name. I've somewhere written it down, but I forgot his name. So he made sure that Federal Reserve money from New York, because there are two Federal Reserve banks, the one from New York would be channeled through the BIS, Bank for International Settlement. That's why it's in Basel. It's a few hundred meters from the German border away, and from there the money will be easily transported across the border into the Reichsbank, and that's where the banker comes in, who knew all about it. How much Hitler knew, I don't know, but he certainly played an enormous role for the U.S. government in both wars, and you know, as the U.S. do, they always dance on at least two or more marriages, weddings, and so once Germany lost against Russia, they were the bad guys. And so this was one of the key purposes for the BIS: transfer money from the Federal Reserve to Germany to fight the Russians. And at that time, you know, especially during the Second World War, you have to think about it. The Soviet Union was an ally. It was an ally in fighting Germany. This is so absurd that one cannot believe it, but that's the way it was. That's exactly the way it was. And there is another thing which is, you probably know, Rainer. When I visited a few years ago the War Museum in Berlin, there's somewhere, it's not very openly available, but there's somewhere a letter or kind of an agreement. Germany is still not under a peace agreement, as you know. There's still an armistice agreement. And this armistice agreement, most people don't know it. And the Germans, I tell them, they say, you must be nuts. But I know it is. They're just on an armistice agreement. Yeah. And that agreement says something to the extent that Germany should never do anything that goes against the interests of the United States. I don't know the exact wording, but that's what is in this agreement, and that explains many of Merkel's, for example, actions. She was afraid. She comes from East Germany, and of course was very ideal for the United States. So all of these are all dots that have to be connected in order to establish and understand how the system works. And this is one of the main purposes that the BIS has been set up. And now, in the meantime, they have become with all this private money, the Rockefeller funds, the Rothschild funds, they have become the central bank of all central banks and controlling up to 90%, more than 90% of the flow of money in these countries.
This is something that most people are totally unaware of.
Yes.
Even most Americans are not aware of the fact that the Fed is a privately owned bank. It is not a governmental entity. It is a privately owned bank. And now that you're spelling this out, through ownership of the Bank of International Settlement, the Rothschilds and probably some others own all the other banks, all the other central banks for sure, but most of the other banks as well. So that is quite incredible. I know that the Germans, I used to think this is, what they call Reichsbürger conspiracy theory. But of course, we know in the meantime that Germany has no sovereignty. They're still under the laws of, I think it's called the SHAEF laws, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. That's who rules us. So anyone who is in line with those laws is fine, which also means that we probably don't have to pay any taxes. But I'll think about that in more detail at a later time.
That's a good point.
This is so bizarre. I mean, it's just a few people who are pulling the strings. It's not very many, maybe 300. You've probably heard about the book written by John something, the Committee of the 300.
Yes, I've heard. I didn't read it, but I've heard and read some summaries about it. So yeah.
Yeah,
John Coleman.
John Coleman, exactly, Dr. Ma. Thank you. Yes, John Coleman is his name. There's another John Coleman who recently, a couple of years ago, passed away. He's the founder of the American Weather Channel. And he once, a few years ago, confronted an interviewer from CNN and told him, "Shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm glad that I can finally talk to a real audience. And here's what I have to say. There is no global warming. Hear me. There is no global warming. There is no climate change." This guy was so cool. But the other guy's the one who wrote, and he's still alive in his late 80s, I think, who wrote the Committee of the 300. And that spells it all out in great detail. I'm not sure if it's only 300, but if I look at the list of the names there, most of them are stupider than, well, really stupid. But they include some pretty big names like Joe Ackermann, who at one time was the CEO of Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
So I'm not really surprised, but I don't think he's the brightest candle on the chandelier either. I'm trying to not underestimate them, but I'm sometimes just extremely surprised to see the stupidity of some of the actors, some of the puppets that they're using. I don't know. But let's change topics. You were going to talk about what's going on in Africa, because Africa is extremely interesting, West Africa in particular, at this point in time.
Right. Yes, West Africa has had within, if I count also Mauritania, to it, that was, I think, a coup in 2013 or 14 or something like that. They've had about 5 or 6 coups, and most of them within the last 2 years, military coups. And all of them, of course, you would say, okay, they want to get rid of France. Probably. But who wants really to get rid of France is the United States. Because all of these military leaders now, these new, even in Gabon, all the others have US military bases. I think Niger has even 2. and so on. France has one too in Niger, and all the others too, except for Gabon. But Gabon has very close links to Djibouti. Djibouti is the largest air base, I think, in the Middle East that the United States have. So they have easy access to Djibouti and get advice from Djibouti. So it's like a local base. Now, all of these new leaders have been put in place, basically have been trained by the United States by the CIA. They have been put in place by the US, basically. They're behind it. That's why Victoria Nuland, the one who said "fuck Europe," remember?
Fuck the EU. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was talking
Yeah,
about
fuck
her
the EU.
involvement in Ukraine. Yeah.
She is also responsible for West Africa, and she came on several trips. And the last trip was when during the Niger coup. When was that? That was in end of July, I believe. She went there on person, and you would think that Niger is not that important. You could do whatever you need to do by a Zoom conversation. No, she came there in person. And the main media said she was not able to even talk to the new leader. That is, of course, bullshit. She helped this new leader to survive. Now, what the forefront of this is, and what I've lived when I worked for these countries, is that they are still colonized by the CFA franc. And the CFA franc is something that was set up by the French during the colonies, or just after during the colonies, and it was enforced just after the colonies, which is a franc. When I was working with the World Bank, we were trying. I had a very, very good French director who was working very hard, and I helped him to what extent I could to devalue the CFA so that the CFA countries became more independent. We managed at one point, but it was a fight with the French executive director. You have directors. You have no idea. But anyway, this was in the 70s, and the CFA still exists. Now, what's so wrong with the CFA? There are two forms. There are the West African countries, there are 8, and there's Central African countries, there are 6. So they have 2 central banks, to confuse probably, but this and two CFA types, but they have the same value. And both central banks, West African and the Central African central banks, are backed up by the Bank of France. The Bank of France controls literally still today 80% of all the reserves of these countries. Can you imagine? So if a country like the Ivory Coast wants to do something, they need some of their reserves for investments. They have to go to the Bank of France and present the project and say, we would like to withdraw so much from our reserves, from our own money. Can you give it to us? And the Bank of France may consider and say no, or considers and says yes, but they charge them an interest, or don't call it interest. They charge them a fee for their own money. It is just unbelievable. It is just unbelievable. There are, of course, some economists, some African, very good economists, particularly from Guinea, who spoke out against that many times, and some of them disappeared. They were too open, they were too prominent, and one of them, a leader whom I had the chance to meet once personally, was Thomas Sankara. The president of Burkina Faso. He was, of course, he was like a Che Guevara for Africa. He wanted to get out of the CFA, and he wanted to make his country independent, and he knew his life will be shortened, and he knew by whom, by his closest advisor, and he knew who was behind it. At that time, it was Mitterrand. Mitterrand, who was responsible for his demise. Maybe half a year before he he was killed, I had the opportunity. I wanted to talk to the presidency for something that had to do with water I was working on. And then Sankara received me personally. We talked for maybe half an hour or maybe a little bit more. This guy was just unbelievable, unbelievable as a human being and how quick he was thinking. All of this is part of the CFA. He wanted to get out and he lost his life, and others did too. So one of the big objectives of these West African countries is to get out of this of this monocle to that allows them not to grow and not to become independent. They're financially not sovereign, economically not sovereign at all. So it is well possible that they say, well, maybe if the US helps us with military coups, we will be able to get rid of the French. But what is more interesting, and I think this is the real purpose of the US getting involved. Many of these West African countries are very rich in resources. Niger, particularly, they have one of the richest oils. They have one of the highest grade uraniums, which is now mostly exploited by France, but would be, of course, of interest for the US. And they have also lots of other minerals, which are used. There's a vein of these what do you call them, rare earths, going from China through Afghanistan. That's also a reason why Afghanistan was occupied, through the Mediterranean and into Africa, all the way into Central Africa. It's like a vein that pulls through it. And these countries, they are being, the countries, they know it, and particularly the US knows it, if the countries don't, that they have all these riches that are used for electronics, for chips, and these chips are used for weaponry and also a little bit for the private sector, but mostly, I think, for the military complex. So this is a reason why I believe the United States is helping, sort of, not officially, these countries to get rid of France. But I don't know what is better, dollarization or independently getting rid of the CFA, because they have the economic strength. They need the right people to advise them how to do it, and they can do it. They can.
I think this is actually what's happening, because this is what I'm hearing from. I'm connected, of course, with the legal scene. Let's put it that way. So when I speak to the lawyers, some of whom are really, really smart, from all over the continent, it sounds, listening to them, it sounds as though, especially the younger generation, is becoming more and more aware of the fact that they can stand on their own. They don't even need to exchange one oppressor for another. They can do it all by themselves. The secret is, however, that they need to probably connect with each other so that they will have the strength, even the military strength, that maybe this requires in order to fight back. But we'll see. We'll see about that. I realize that if they fall for this lie that the American military is going to help them, we know they're not going to help anyone. They're only in it for themselves. It's all about money. But if they fall for these lies, nothing's going to change. They're just going to wake up one morning, and instead of one oppressor, there's going to be another one, once again looting and plundering their countries. We'll see what happens, but it is kind of promising what I see there on the horizon.
Exactly, and I think what is maybe showing them the way it goes, these young people. I mean, they need more than that, but what is showing them what is going on is, if they remember 2011, when the French, with the help of NATO, killed Gaddafi. They literally lynched Gaddafi in 2011. Why? Because Gaddafi wanted to introduce the gold dinar as a unique currency for Africa, to get rid of the usurpers, all those predators, particularly the French, and the Brits and the United States, who were using the currencies, the existing currencies, the French, of course, the CFA, and all the other local currencies were under the former colonializers like the Brits and the new ones and the United States. So they wanted to get rid of that, and Gaddafi may have had the idea to. He had the idea to do it. He may have had also the power to do it because his riches are enormous. He not only had a lot of gold, he could actually back up his currency with petrol. And the West, of course, knew that. Particularly the U.S., they have a map where they know exactly where the petrol is all over the place. I mean, they knew, for example, that there's a huge petrol reserves in front of Port-au-Prince of Haiti, and that's how the earthquake 2010 happened, because it's shale oil, which is deep down and is very expensive to get up. But with an earthquake, these plaques, they break, and the pressure of the oil puts the oil closer to exploitation. And couple of years, I think, or 3 years after the earthquake, you could already see ExxonMobil exploring in front of so, but people don't see that. The media don't report it, and it's just unbelievable. But the young, I think the young Africans, they do have the potential, but as you said, they need to get together, and I think they would need some independent advice. And on what you are planning to do in Africa may actually lead to more awareness of these people and to get them together. If you can do that and bring them together, I think that would be a good thing, because they have the capacity. I think they are now well enough educated to do that, to get away from the French without replacing them with the Americans. And this is the key, because they have to become sovereign countries. And with the sovereign Africa, I think you have a very good platform.
I think this is what many people are actually hoping for. I know that a lot of people in the Western world have realized that Western culture has been so perverted. Most people, I keep telling this, it's not really a joke, but most people think that Western culture is Kim Kardashian, which is a joke, of course. But but it all started out. It was European culture that should have been much more influenced by the Russians, which didn't happen. Instead, it was influenced by the Americans. And now this is what we got, Kim Kardashian. But it is not the equivalent of a Western culture. So most of us in the West have very high hopes on the indigenous people, Africa in particular, but also the other indigenous people, because they're so much closer to real reality, which is not materialism, but it has to do with nature, which is very simple. That's where we get our health. That's where we get everything. What's his name? Who you just mentioned? Gaddafi. He was powerful enough, and he had enough money to buy Sarkozy's election for him, right?
Yes.
That's what happened. Yeah.
And at that time, Sarkozy was the president who ordered NATO to lynch him.
Yeah, right. So one final question I have. We do realize that even though there are only a few, or maybe a couple of hundred, or maybe a couple of thousand people who are pulling the strings behind the scenes, the usual suspects who we can see, but there's others behind them who we can't see. The usual suspects, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Gateses, and a few more. But the only way they can get away with what they're doing, which is basically playing their fear-mongering game, is because so many people are participating, so many people are playing along. They're pulling the strings of so many puppets in politics, in the mainstream media, in science. Part of the reason is bribery, obviously, but another part of the reason is extortion. So this very dark topic is coming out into the open right now. It's about pedophilia, which they're openly trying to sexualize children, but it's much worse. This
Oh, yeah,
morning,
much worse.
it's much worse. It's ritual child abuse. They're dependent on this, almost as a lifeline. This morning, I ran with my dogs and I ran into an American who had gotten 3 shots, and then he realized, damn, something is wrong. I should have used my own brain. I should have used my own reasoning. He understands pretty much everything right now. And he said, when we began to discuss how come there's so many puppets out there. Yes, sure, bribery, but it's also about extortion. And then he said, that's probably what Lance Armstrong was all about. It's not just regular doping. It was blood transfusions he got before his races, and that's how he managed to that his blood managed to, I don't know, provide him with more oxygen than his competitors. So this very, very, very dark secret is now coming out into the open. I think that this is going to be what breaks the camel's back, because, as I keep repeating, they can explain everything away, but this is too much for the general public. Once the general public wakes up to this, it'll be so horrifying that some people just won't be able to cope with it. But on the other hand, others will. And that's what's going to actually break their back, because, as I had never suspected, this is so much more pervasive than I used to think. Many years ago, I represented survivors of MK Ultra and ritual child abuse. This is 23 years ago, I think. And back then I thought this is a few isolated cases, but that's not true. It's far, far worse. Have you heard rumors about this when you were still working for WHO and others?
Well, yes. I mean, I can just go back to this song of the Eagles, Hotel California. You probably know that.
Of
And
course.
this song came out most people, they like it, but they don't know what it's all about. So what I tried to do then, I sent them the lyrics, so that they see, at least from the lyrics, what may be behind it. This is a super song, and that came out in '76. So this whole thing is not new, and it goes back much farther. And yes, WHO, of course, was confronted with it, but it was shoved under the rug, because who is behind WHO? The Gates and the Rockefellers, who are part of this whole game. So I mean, I agree with you. I think this will eventually come to the fore. And I told my wife not too long ago, because she also likes the song, and of course, and ever so often when I hear it on the radio, I'm very happy about it. Because that means that somebody either just likes it or somebody understands what it means. And since I found out, or I'm registering in my mind that it's played much more often now than it is in the past, I think some people are waking up, but that's only superficial. I think there's much more in the media now, particularly in the non-mainstream media, but even the mainstream media cannot avoid it anymore. And so I think you're right. This will be the bigger explosion, because there are very, very high level people involved in it, very high level people. And it's not just the Catholics. It's going much deeper than that. And I think this may come out, and will eventually break the camel's back.
Yeah. Dagmar, you want to ask a question?
Yeah. Peter, the name of Jean Ziegler came to my mind. You know him probably very well.
Yeah, I know him. I know he's a friend. I know him quite well. Yeah, I haven't seen him for a long time, because he is almost has become a little bit reclusive. But we are supposed to meet one of these days again. But yes, I know him.
That was my question. Is he still active? Because he knows all about Africa, yeah?
Yes, he knows a lot about Africa. He has been the special advisor on human rights, particularly on Africa. So yes, how active he is, I think he's still a little active, but I think most of his activity is no longer giving big conferences and interviews, as far as I understand it. But he writes, he is an avid writer. He writes lots of books and articles, and ever so often, yes, he is on interviews.
But maybe he could advise us, ICC, Rainer.
He's in his late 80s now, isn't he?
Yeah.
In his late 80s,
So?
yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's yes, I mean, I can I wanted to do that anyway, call him one of these days and get together, because he always says, yeah, we have to get together, and then, but right now I'm going on vacation, or I'm going to Paris, or then it never
Well,
happens.
well, why not? If you do have a chance to meet him, maybe we can arrange an informal, not a real interview, but first let's talk informally. That could be
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I will do that. Yeah,
Great.
I will do that. Yes. He is a very good friend. We had interviews together on many occasions, and yes.
Excellent. Sounds good. So I think we have reason to be optimistic because so much stuff is coming out into the open that would have been discarded by most of us, including myself, up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But now people are really waking up in droves all over the world, especially in Africa, it seems. So, despite the fact that we're dealing with extremely evil people who appear to be human but are not, because they're devoid of all human qualities, no empathy, no regrets, no love, no nothing. That's why they need us. Despite this fact, I think we have reason to believe that there will be a happy ending to all of this for us, and not in the distant future, but in the near future, because things are happening very, very quickly right now. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, because philosophically and intellectually, I think, and also looking at Buddhism and Taoism, light will prevail in the end. And but it doesn't prevail just on its own. I think what we have to participate in it, and we have to be awakened to make the light actually prevail.
Yeah.
We have to hit the proverbial what do you call it? Slit in the wall. We have to break the wall that the light comes through.
Yeah.
And that's our job. And the light is there and will come through. But we have to work.
Maybe some of us will even have to kick in the door, but I have no problem doing that.
I help you with it. I help.
Thank you. Well, Peter, this has been fun, actually. I know these are not the best of times, but it's always good to talk to someone who knows what he's talking about and who has an optimistic outlook, because that's what we all need. This is how we're going to get through this until we reach the end of this tunnel.
I agree. Totally agree.
Okay. I'll stop the recording, but again, I thank you very, very much. We will have to repeat this.
Thank you very much, Rainer. It was great to be with you, and I hope, yes, let's repeat it.